Very good evening to my honorable speaker, our president of the Bhumika Trust, and all my attendees. मैं आप सभी को भूमिका ट्रस्ट की ओर से इस ऑनलाइन प्लेटफॉर्म एवं इस कार्यक्रम में स्वागत करता हूं. As we are all aware of the fact that India is right now facing its biggest crisis, and the suffering of the people can only be acknowledged by the fact that many among us have lost our dear ones amidst this pandemic. What we all really need is to cheer ourselves a bit and stronghold some such programs where we can share and enlighten our thoughts. और इसी के प्रारूप में अब मैं भूमिका ट्रस्ट के प्रेसिडेंट मिस्टर जयंत राघव को बुलाना चाहूँगा, जो हमें भूमिका ट्रस्ट के बारे में चंद शब्दों में कुछ बताएंगे. Over to you, Jayant.
So thank you, Shubham. So good evening, everyone. सभी को शुभ संध्या. बेसिकली एक भूमिका ट्रस्ट जो एक बनाया हुआ ऐसा ट्रस्ट है जो कि एक स्टूडेंट्स की बनाई हुई ट्रस्ट है, जो कि एक स्टूडेंट्स इनिशिएटिव है, एक कॉलेज स्टूडेंट्स का, और जिसके अंदर हम 4 मेंबर्स ने जो ने स्टार्ट किया था. इट वाज फाउंडेड ऑन 23rd February 2021 and we got the inauguration done on the 7th of March 2021. And now today we are here for the second lecture as our webinar series. We have launched a webinar series on the topic feminism. So this is our lecture 2. Lecture 1 was done by Mrs. Ritu Kumari. So that is all a small summary that I can give it as of now. If anyone wants to know more, we can, well, there to tell you more. That's over from my side, and now over to Sushil.
Thank you, Jan. So before moving forward, now I would like to recall the rules for the webinar. Attendees are asked to join with their original names as registered. Attendees need to be on mute. No attendee is allowed to unmute their mic to speak unless asked to do so. If still it is done, once a warning will be given, and second time the attendee will be removed from the meeting and won't be allowed to enter on the any terminate condition. Attendees can type in the chat box for any confusion, question, and issues, and attendees can switch on their video if they want. That's all. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Sushil, for the rules reminding. And now I would like one of our member, Ms. Guhar Bano, to introduce our eminent speaker. Over to you, Guhar.
Yeah, good evening, everyone. It's a good pleasure for me to introduce our speaker today, Dr. Jyoti Atwal, who's going to talk to us on today's topic. Intersectionality is a key for strong feminism. Dr. Jyoti Atwal is Associate Professor at Center for Historical Studies, School of Social Science, Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi, India, and Adjunct Professor at Department of History, Faculty of Arts, Human and Social Science, University of Limerick, Ireland. She specializes in gender history of India in the colonial and post-colonial context. She is a member of the editorial board of Women's History Review. She was awarded from the Irish Foreign Ministry toward Research Exchange. She is also member of advisory board of Pinnacle Project at University College Dublin to examine the professional needs and career trajectories of women's teachers in India and in Pakistan. Her recent publications include an edited volume on gender and violence in historical and contemporary perspective, situating India. She has authored Real and Imagined Widows, Gender Relation in Colonial North India. She has authored several articles on aspects of gender, motherhood, widowhood, feminism, caste, and international and transnational connection. Her forthcoming publication include a co-edited volume, Gender and History, Ireland, 1852 to 1922. She has been a visiting fellow of Trinity College, Dublin, University College Cork, University of Sydney, College of Worcester and New York University, Uppsala University, Sweden. She has delivered lectures and keynote lectures in several countries. I would like to welcome our honorable speaker, Dr. Jyoti Atwal. Thank you, ma'am, for accepting our invitation. Over to you, ma'am. Yeah, Shubham, over to you.
First of all, I would like to really thank Dr. Prateek and the organizers of Bhumika Trust and all the students who are running the trust and organizing these lectures, talks. Uh, Very grateful to all of you that you chose to have me and chose to listen to me. And it's a pleasure to talk to the younger people and to colleagues at any given time. However, timing, of course, as you correctly mentioned, is unfortunate, and we are living in very unfortunate times. We are going through such a bloody pandemic, and also, as we speak, as we talk, as things are going on in entire India. People are suffering and there's pain, death. First of all, I'd like to offer my, you know, uh, prayers to those people and hope and pray that this will be sorted out soon. We will have enough. We will be able to save people. So when my heart goes out to the doctors and the healthcare workers and so on, and we as Indians, obviously, we are very pained to see this kind of systemic failure, and also the general shortages, acute shortages. In JNU itself, my colleagues, many of them are driven, have been driven into these circumstances, and some of them have lost their lives. So it's a very unfortunate time. But yes, I think there is always a reason to meet and discuss, and we do what we do. And I really accepted this. Obviously, it's not one of the best times when we can communicate, but let's try. And also, a bit of a diversion is not a bad thing. However, the topic that I was given, intersectionality and feminism, is a topic which is so central to the humanities these days. And as we cannot isolate ourselves in history. I'm a historian and a feminist historian, gender studies historian, whichever you may want to call that, a disciplinary historian, but somebody who has moved into a kind of position, uh, academic. So in this case, it becomes very important and necessary that we point out to some of the things that we do in everyday life, that we observe around us, and yet not understand things as just news or information. But the social science is basically a uh, processing discipline, which teaches you how to do critical thinking, not just, you know, uh, collect facts and be empirical, but also how to interpret those facts. And I think that is where the role of the historian, the political scientist, sociologist, economist, all our roles collapse to make it more interdisciplinary. Now, we all know what is interdisciplinary, but it is still a vaguely known what is intersectionality. This is a very interesting word coined in the Americas in the 1890s, 1889, 1980, 1989, 1990s, and it began with the Black women's movement. Now, we are not talking about only feminism. Feminism is uh, not so new. As you know, you would all be familiar with various kinds of feminism. If I tell you Western feminism, then something comes to your mind. But if I tell you Indian feminism, then of course you do have some idea what it is, and you would know that feminism is, what you may not know the definition, and I'm totally against defining things, because it actually packs it into a frame where you can't get out, and then you pass on that. So some of these terminologies such as intersectionality, etc., are still developing, and are still the researchers are giving it a certain shape. And I will just familiarize you with some of those things and mix it with some of my research as to how I have chosen to look at intersectionality. So I'm going to share screen with you. What I will be doing is I will go into some of the historiography that has come up in the past few years. Yes, so I would do three things. First, I'm going to discuss some historiography, which has gone and moved towards intersectionality, and then I'll discuss Black history and caste, which is the main subject of my talk, and then we'll look at how contemporary it's relevant and all that. Now, I know this is really small. There's something I had saved, but it had not been saved, unfortunately. So, okay. So as you know, the history writing in India, or feminist studies in India are quite old, and it began as early as 1930s. And it would be unfair to say that feminism in India is a very new process, because 1880s is a time when we have women writers from Maharashtra, from Pune, and from other parts of Maharashtra, talking about equality, comparisons between men and women. I'm talking about Tarabai Shinde. All of you who are studying history from Delhi University might have heard of her. By the time you enter your third year, I'm told that you are introduced to that kind of writing. There is Pandita Ramabai Saraswati again. So Maharashtra in some ways did become a hub of these writings, although they were disconnected. The writings were not speaking to each other, but nevertheless there was an engagement, serious engagement with the issues of comparison between men and women. And we are not talking about reformation. We're not talking about the issue of reform and revival, etc., which is very, very typical of the 19th century. We are talking about the move towards feminism, which means essentially a movement towards a certain kind of a notion that women have been made unequal and they were not to be born as unequal, which is very much a Simone de Beauvoir kind of an assertion. But there needs to be a dissatisfaction. The first content is that there needs to be a dissatisfaction with the existing circumstances. There needs to be an issue. An issue here was, of course, widow remarriage. The issue was also the age of consent, the the child marriages were, of course, one of the dominated as an agenda of the 19th century, apart from sati, which you all know. So 19th century, often known as the long 19th century, was a particular moment in which we start talking about feminists in India. And the reason I'm going back to 1930s, the 1950s, after independence, is how the history writing, or how the writing on feminism, or how feminism itself has evolved. Now, in the years after independence, most of the feminist writings, they were not even calling themselves feminist. There's no notion. However, there is a notion that women's participation was very important for the nation, and women need to be not only family serving, but also nation serving. Now, Now, this idea, this whole idea of service to nation was, of course, an anti-colonial, a general post-colonial fallout of the anti-colonial movement, which involved women, Gandhian movement, or be it Bhagat Singh-styled movement, be it the communist movement, etc. All the movements were linked with different strands of internationalism, and so we were always connected with what is happening internationally. However, when it came to women's reform, there was an intrinsic. When it came to lawmaking, especially, there was always a going back to what is there in the Shastras and Dharma Sutras, etc. But nevertheless, all the efforts were inspired by how women thought the world looked outside them, the country, and outside their own community and so on. So there were this idea that we would not, we didn't, our feminist variety was not internal looking but external looking as well. So the works, the major works, I've just listed some of the works put in my book as well, so I could tell you what I do. So there is A.S. Altaker, the first, he takes up this question of what is the position of women in Hindu civilization. And this is written in 1938. Now, this book is, of course, about how have women been located in the text, in the Shastras and in the religious texts, and what was their position there. So we've come a long way from establishing only the textual position of women to now talking about intersectionality. So this is the gap, the wide bridge that we have crossed, and how we've done that. Well, that's the subject of the lecture today. Then we have, of course, nationalist writings like Neera Desai's Women in Modern India, more about contributory histories. Then in 1975, when the Women's Equality Status Report came out, sure, all of you know how that report was a turning point for feminist historiography, because it is then that there emerges a realization that the women could not obviously survive only on the basis of a nationalist identity. They had to become equal. This report did reveal some of the facts which were quite shocking even for that period, such as views on dowry, such as views on remarriage and so on, were quite retrograde, so to say. Then we move on to exploration on the lines of postmodern histories. As you know, Foucauldian idea that colonial period was not only about education, because it had often been made out that because it's the colonial period in which the education becomes very important, that the women progressed, probably made a turn towards some kind of consciousness. And that has been reinvestigated. Women's historians, feminist historians have gone in and looked at how valid is this claim, and they've seen that, like Foucauldian historian, women have gained a lot from this history where modernity is not developmental. Okay, modernity is not progressive. Modernity cannot only be about opening of institutions. It had to be about imparting an idea and making it more acceptable, and that had not happened. It was very clear from the 1975 report that even with the spread of education, there was a certain kind of weight that was put on women to be traditional and also to be very subservient. And of course, with coming of dowry, as you would know, 1970s and 80s was time. So this is the brief historiography of how history had been written, was dominated by the issues. And of course, we have we moved towards in 1990s was again another watershed in writing of feminist writings, feminist scholarship. And this came with Beena Agarwal's book, which was called A Field of One's Own, Gender and Land Rights in South Asia. First of all, the book did not lend itself on the basis of a colonial background. It did not go into. It did not look into only the results of the anti-colonial movement. It went ahead and it looked at how land was being discussed, because that is something which earlier historians or feminist historians had discussed. Uh, Given this view of things, we in 1990s we have more work, and as you know, the earlier period. Uh, Sorry, I'm just doing the slide. If that comes on, it's very good. Yes. And again, another version of this very rich book written in Marathi came out, which is Tarabai Shinde's Critique of Gender Relations in Colonial India, Rosa Lindo Handlon, so on. Again, that happens in 1990s. So labor movement of the 1970s is very critical of the fallout of the colonial period. So the whole thing about Renaissance, this whole 19th century Renaissance, is being questioned there with evidence from with different kinds of evidence from history and literature as well. As we know, Gayatri Spivak's very well known work. Sorry, I missed the Gayatri Spivak thing here. As you can see here, 1980s. Gayatri Spivak, of course, becomes one of the first women to talk about the subaltern. And it is in this period that you also have Ranjit Guha's subaltern school, but dominated by the concern of the people, the work. It included labor, not only labor, but people who were not in an organized form of factory system, people who were probably housemaids, they don't account, their labor participation is not measured. So moving mostly on the lines of economic history and subaltern history emerges as a force. However, it emerges as a force, but it also downslides very soon. Because once you say subaltern, you're neglecting the fact that there are some people whose ideology will dominate over them. So this kind of understanding, subaltern is now a very different kind of a word, as you know. Meera Kushambi, of course, I really appreciate her work, Crossing Thresholds, feminist essays, social history, made an assertion as early as 2007 that women did not appear on the national scene or on the productive scene. They were always there. That there is no inner and outer, as has been postulated. And this inner and outer was very strong in Bengal, as you know, because of the Bhadralok, which were very, very visible in that particular area. And inner and outer worlds could often be contrasted. Okay, now this is the kind of history writing that has been done, and then internationally, we have also in our feminist studies adopted intersectionality, and we have borrowed from one, Neera Yuval Davis. Neera Yuval Davis is known for her work on gender and nation, and she talks about nationalism. She talks about how national identity is so how women and national identity are woven together through the idea of citizenship, because a woman is an evolving citizen like the men. However, but by putting the chains of the race, class, color, etc., and of reproduction, she is chained to. She's made subservient to the idea of nation. She merely serves it. Okay, she doesn't decide. She is not a participant in the nation making, and this becomes a problem. But it is in 2011 that Neera Yuval Davis writes about intersectional contestations. And this is particularly a very interesting work, because it shows how immigrant women who move from one country to another through family, through marriage, through family, or through some kind of necessity to work, or good prospects to another nation, again are yeah. Can you all see my screen? Is that all right? Yes?
Yes, ma'am. Yes,
Okay,
ma'am.
good, very good. Thank you. So intersectionality acquired a new form, but intersectionality prior to that did not emerge in England, because Neera Yuval Davis, England, she writes from that perspective. However, the emergence of this intersectionality thesis, or as an idea, germinates in America. Okay, it doesn't germinate here, and the biggest push comes from the Black women in America. And as you know, Black women's movement is very strong, and the labor movement is very strong, was very strong in the 70s and 80s, and in England, in the UK. And it is historically very well established that the Black women's, some of the best Black women's studies have been done in America. So what is this? This we are, I'm just going to wrap up the historiography in 2 minutes. The other important factor which we as scholars look at, and this is also a challenge that we face when we write on feminism or feminist history, is that we have to also constantly look at autobiographies. Okay. Sorry, did you ask me to start my video? Okay, I'm sorry, I didn't realize that was closed. Sorry. Yeah. Okay. The other issue is about how do you weave autobiographies? As you know, one thing is to go national, then international, then global, then intersectional, when we do women's studies. But what happens when we do autobiography? What is the location of the autobiography? Can it be used as an important text? Well, so far as historians, yes, I can tell you we've been using autobiography as in a very effective way. It is a great source of information. It gives you an alternative history. Sometimes it gives you an alternative history. Sometimes it tells you about nation from a woman's perspective, tells you about, let's say, health from a woman's perspective, tells you about education from a woman's perspective, and also how women experience it, how women experience how their education, their thinking, their household changes them. So a lot of focus has been on this household and upbringing of women and so on, and it remains a very important part of even Indian scholarship. And the other is, the other book which I find also very path-breaking was Feminist Theory and the Body. Again, I would go on and say Judith Butler. I'm sure all of you have heard her name. She's a very, very important person for doing any history which is to do with alternative sexualities or queer histories, as we call it. Yes. I won't go into this straight away. I would like to go into some of the more fundamental issues of intersectionality. Sorry, I'm trying to move my. Yes. So intersectionality as an idea germinates in America, as I've just mentioned. It is in this particular it is in the 1980s that it takes a certain form. There's the racial feminization of poverty, women of color as portents of the future for all women. Now, the main question that was being asked in the 1980s in America is that, is it true that women, because they're black, they're denied an opportunity? Is that one thing? Or all women are denied opportunity? Whether, how do you fit in this? And so the question of intersectionality evolves, and it becomes very important from that period onwards. When you realize that the poverty is, some women are more poor and some women are not heard that well. Some women have a voice, some don't. So that becomes a kind of a criteria. How do you segregate these women? How do you identify who is more vulnerable? It's not about even degrees of vulnerability. For example, in India, we have been the most of the experience of the 19th century collective historiography is with the women who are not labeled women who are not low caste women. Okay, so the upper caste women's narrative takes the dominant form of feminism. So the role of defining feminism, therefore, lies with a certain kind of class of women. Okay, so class again becomes very important. When we say intersectionality, we'll come to the definition as well. So Phyllis Palmer, of course, is the first person to write, but not very, very cogently, but she starts writing about the racial feminization of poverty. In this particular work, she asks the question why white women in the women's movement had not created more effective and continuous alliances with black women. What does that mean? Why should, there is some kind of sympathy with which women have with each other when they write, but what happens in real life? What happens comes to activism? What happens when it comes to fighting for rights? Okay, so I will now quickly move from here to my main subject, black women and Dalit women and caste, the whole idea of caste. And so the question we are posing is that why is therefore there's no alliance possible between black women and the general women's movement? And same question we will have to pose for the Indian scenario as well. And in the Indian scenario, this question has not been posed as of now. Okay, so I'm going to okay. Now, here is one of the first person who develops this idea of Palmer and takes it. This is Kimberly Crenshaw, and what does this person say? Intersectionality. How do we? The term was coined by her very clearly, using some of the resources. And you will find this this material on the internet. You can go to the link, and the paper is there. Okay, the paper is there on uploaded, and it's a very interesting reading, non-complicated reading. Now, what Kimberly thought was mostly important in terms of the legal domain, as to how some of the cases that were coming up in 1980s from the work domain, where there were cases of women being excluded, black women were excluded from employment in certain places. Okay, so there were 3 cases which she discusses, but we will not discuss those 3 cases. We will simply touch upon the 2. And they're not very, it's not important what the cases were. The important thing was what was the outcome. The outcome was that it was being realized that exclusion from certain places was becoming a kind of an unconscious activity, or conscious as well, we do not know. And this needed to be pointed out, that why is it that a certain company or a place had not employed black women prior to 1964. Okay, why they had not included these black women? Was it a policy, or was it an unconscious effort not to bring black women in? They were not acceptable. The company's image would suffer, etc., etc. You know, so this academic intervention was based on some of the cases, those which were found, and the end result was a non-success, that even the court did not really intervene. You know, it didn't really seem to intervene in these cases. There was a difficulty of evidence finding, and that becomes another set of problems. How do you find evidence of discrimination when especially the discrimination has just been realized? How do you find? So when people say there has been 1,000 years of discrimination, uh, castes have dominated, certain castes dominated other castes for centuries, and then some of the scholars will say, excuse me, can you give me evidence? Now you can't find evidence for anything, even in the 20th century. It's so difficult in the absence of record keeping. So a commonsensical or intersectional approach to things becomes important. That is what I meant when I began by saying that intersectionality is a kind of a idea which is in the process of its formation, in the process of its uh, evolution in the academia. And we as Indian scholars can evolve it the way we want to evolve it. It's not as though we will have to look at black studies and so on. So okay, let's move on from here. So I just tell you how basically the idea of intersectionality has evolved in terms of definition. Because the intersectional experience, according to Kimberly, is greater than the sum of racism. Is greater than the sum of racism and sexism. Any analysis that does not take intersectionality into account cannot sufficiently address the particular manner in which black women are subordinated. Now, it was not a question whether we know feminism, whether there is feminist approach is necessary. Feminist approach may not necessarily recognize the fact that the women who are in the laboring, who work as labor in the unorganized or organized sectors, in the factories or outside the factories, in the domestic domain. How do you account for their labor? There is something called intersectionality, which is beyond that. Middle class women do not suffer from the same handicap that a woman working in the domestic domain will suffer. Okay. So the class and caste and status, it could be disability. Now, I must say that, a lot of work has come out in the past 10 years, I would say 10 to 12 years, pointing out to disability and feminism. And I would also bring in intersectionality to that. This is one of the factors which is an intersecting factor in a woman's life. If a woman is, and we know the work of Anita Ghai, very well-known feminist scholar, she has documented it so well. And there's a colleague of mine, Nilika Mehrotra, who has an article. She has, of course, spent considerable fieldwork time working on this, but also in the other volume, which in the volume which I edited last year, the book came out. It's called Gender and Violence in Historical and Contemporary Perspectives. We located the root causes of violence against women. So our main focus was violence, but we looked at historical violence, we looked at contemporary violence. In case of contemporary violence, we looked at the issue of how women who were disabled, or what you now call, in a very progressive way, differently abled, women were vulnerable to some more things which non-disabled women were not. So we cannot say feminism will cover everything. Okay, so feminism, the feminism is not a singular idea. On its own, it cannot exist if it doesn't diversify and doesn't look at these intersectionalities. Now, moving on. Now, this is the Oxford Dictionary meaning: the interconnected nature of social categorization, such as race, class, and gender. I wish disability was there, and caste was there, regarded as creating overlapping and interdependent systems of discrimination or disadvantage. A theoretical approach based on such a premise. This is definitely a very loose definition, which is very Western in its own ways. It doesn't include caste, but as you know, a very important work on caste, which is exactly uh, the focus of, which aims to tell us that caste and feminism are related. And not only that, how people experience caste and race. There is a great deal of similarity between how Americans can also experience race in a similar manner. About 20 years ago or 15 years ago, there was a trend to understand uh, West and East in a very different way. East and West were, very different in their experience and uh, their history. So the study of the two societies would be different. But now, as we are becoming more global, there are these. This whole idea of intersectionality, which is becoming more and more dominant day by day. We look at some of the issues which unite us. For example, race and caste. Now, race in America and caste in India, there are a lot of similarities. These would not be acceptable. People would not accept them as a valid ground for investigation. But now they do. And that is the difference that Isabel Wilkinson's book has made. This is a book which came out last year. I'll talk to you in about 2 minutes. I'm coming back to some of the cases which discussed in Kimberly's book. Now, this was, of course, discrimination when it comes to the company appointment. So this is Dreek Reed versus General Motors. Now, this General Motors did not hire black women prior to 1964. And black women were hired only after 1970 and lost their jobs in a seniority-based layoff. So while they did get some positions, they were laid off because they were, for some reason, and they never went up to any position, power, or any reasonable seniority. Now, all this was not coincidental. There was a certain amount of what you may want to call it discrimination. There's a presumption of efficiency levels, etc., preconceived ideas about this, about the color, the women's presence, to have a woman in a factory. She would not hold the deals. She could not deal well with other companies. So she never went up. So this case brought about a lot of things to the fore. In India, just before I proceed, Ben, how much time have I got? Jayant?
Ma'am, take your time.
Take your time, ma'am. Okay. Very generous.
Here to listen, obviously.
Okay. 15 minutes around that. Okay.
Sure.
Okay. Sure, ma'am.
I would like to have questions and more interaction after that. Yes. So,
sure, ma'am.
So the problem here was that, first of all, when the case went up in the court, it was found that, there were not too many qualified black women who were not capable of serving the senior positions, so that was a justified thing to do. And also white women, some of the white women also didn't make it. So, you know, and black men didn't make it. So why are the black women so eager? Even if they didn't make it. So the whole discourse was a very it was on the verge of being dismissed, and I think such cases give us an opportunity to look at the intersectionality as to what else is operating other than the fact this woman is a woman, you know, apart from her gender, if there is something more which is coming in and working here. So discrimination against a white female is thus a standard sex discrimination claim. Uh, for example, let me also broaden this a bit. When the Vishaka guidelines came in for violence at workplace, uh, uh, it it was addressing the issue of harassment. That while there was no punishment for harassment, harassment needs to be taken as a factor of discrimination against women. And one could introduce some outrage of modesty of women and so on, which is of course the clauses the under the IPC, and these could be invoked by a woman saying, somebody said this to me, so he outraged my modesty and so on. Prior to that, only rape and penetration was a reason for a woman to go to a court and say to the police and subsequently the court, where she could prove, and she had to prove it through medical means, which was also a very ridiculous one. So the medical means were inadequate. Framing would often say, well, no harm was done to this woman, so there was no rape. So it is as easy as that in the legal domain, and Flavia Agnes for a long time has been flagging this. I like her work because she is very critical of lawmaking and police, and she would point out to these loopholes while women have been fighting for law, but they're also critical of it. So this is an achievement of women's movement, that you can do both. You can fight for a law at the same time. If it is not adequate, you can fight against it or against the inadequacy of it. Well, moving on. So basically, what one saw in America was that the notion of gender equality was very white dominated, where it was designed in a way that only white females, it meant whatever the white female experienced became discriminatory. The discrimination was understood as only white females' experience, not the black females' experience. Okay, so it is this experiential difference which came out in courts, police, etc. That this whole idea that one needs to produce a scholarship to be aware, because there is no way one can produce a data or an evidence which the law usually needs. How will you say this is a white female and this is a black female and so on? Well, moving on. This is again the case. Now, this is a very interesting work. This is a very good, very interesting book, which if you find, and this is quite inexpensive if you order it, but it's really interesting for you to read. This is a 2020 book by Isabel Wilkerson, and it claims that caste system is an artificial construction, fixed and embedded ranking of human value that sets the presumed supremacy of one group against the presumed inferiority of other groups on the basis of ancestry and often immutable traits that would be neutral in the abstract but are ascribed life and death. Now, we all know that caste, as history students or as sociology students, we all look at the past. We all say, oh, well, caste system, how old is it? What was it like in 10th century? What was it like in 15th century? What happened in 16th and 17th, the 19th century? And how did Indians or Hindus themselves try to reform? We look at history as that. Okay, but here is an equation where she says it is an artificial construction. Okay, just like the race, it's an artificial construction, and people are attributed a certain status according to that. So the whole idea of inequality went hand in hand with feminism. So intersectionality is the only way we will come to know who are these groups we are talking about. Women are not one. Okay? That becomes very important. So I think this is a book which is long awaited, and she has there are other people also who have compared uh, who have compared caste and race. This is not a new comparison, but mostly in the sense that they're not the same. They're different because that has a history. Well, she's saying, well, it doesn't matter. Caste matters because the way it is played out is so similar to race. Okay, more on that. Now, what I'm going to do is show you another. I'm going to take you to some of the Indian screens, Indian scenario, and sorry, this somehow the slides didn't merge here. Now, okay. So as I would. There's a lot of work that has been done on labor, and labor and caste are quite interconnected issues, and we have great scholarship in India that has come out. I will not be going into that, but I'm just because I know they're very, there's this time limitation. So just for 5-6 minutes, I will talk about how we can use the intersectional studies for looking at Indian feminism and in Indian feminist scholarship. Okay, so caste in modern India, as you all know. Uh, First of all women in history, Indian history, or in the present day, are not suffering in a in a in a homogeneous way. Okay, they have a different way in which they suffer, and there is, of course, the caste-based violence, because we see a lot of rape cases. Badayan case 2014, as you know. I think some of you may have seen Article 15, the movie, out of which you could realize the kind of structural um the structure of caste, and the problems faced by the victims, or in this case actually dead victims. um, the problems faced by the police, the individuals in establishing the crime. So, given the fact that there is a caste location and so on, and how it moves, how that is pushed through in a certain context. Uh, so there was a push in the let's say more to in the late 1990s, to dehomogenize the pain when you come to sexual violence or mental violence, abuse, etc. Uh, there is this pain which comes out, which you need to dehomogenize. And many of the Dalit scholars and other people find the narratives of raped women shameful. Now, problem is that most of the history, the feminist history that therefore gets written, is not by the Dalit scholars, but by others who are not Dalit scholars. Now, it will be very unscholarly to say that non-Dalit scholars cannot write Dalit history. Okay, it's like men cannot write women's history. Well, it's not so simple to say that. It would be a slightly over presuming that this would happen. They would always write history not from their perspective. So it is the perspectives that matter. And in this particular domain of writing of history, most of the history of the Dalit women have got written by the non-Dalit women. So they come across either as victims or bodies in pain. They become very, objects of sympathy. So the victimhood is probably blown into high proportions, which is, yes, the case in this particular, uh, but it is not enough to understand the intersectionality as to what led to it and other things. So some of the Dalit women who have been this is a scholarship, I will not go into this, but however, very important writing that came up which talks about this kind of intersectionality is writing Caste, Writing Gender by Sharmila Rege. And this has been one of the finest works on women. Unfortunately, not much work on women has been written on violence. There is a big vacuum when it comes to writing about Dalit women's bodies. For example, with Sharmila Rege is talking about a experiential domain where how do women, what is their struggle in daily life to educate themselves, what is their struggle with marriage, what is their struggle with children, what is their struggle with other forms of companionship or other forms of family and friendships. There is a vast area, but so far there has been very little writing violence, although violence is the main reason why it should be written about. Violence is a law and order problem. This is crime, leading to a certain degree of crime. So traditional model of caste as a consensual system was based on complementarity. What that means is uh, that there is a certain consent to the caste system. That is there's a presumption. That is why there is very little uh, writing or questioning of the caste system as a major uh, intersectional factor, which makes these women more vulnerable to violence, uh, such as revenge, such as punishment for the lower caste people. The women will be raped, so it will have a direct bearing on the women, because if their women are raped, they would be put to shame, and that would be a revenge of different kinds. This is, of course, quite limited to the rural settings, but in the urban setting, this is visible. Uh, there has been some work indicating that. However, I want to jump into uh, the uh, sorry. Just look into one of the yes. Okay. Now, in the 19th century, you do not see a Dalit public. You do not see a public which is conscious, which is discussing, which is opinionated, as is today. So there is a lack in the 19th century of a Dalit public. So what you call Dalit public comes from Jürgen Habermas' notion of the public sphere. And there is also the notion of counter public, that there evolve groups, which take up the cause, and they are always at a differently positioned to understand the homogeneity of their position. So the Dalit public will be a public which will constitute itself, and then a certain counter narrative will come out of that. Okay. So this was not happening initially in the 19th century, because the history of social reform, women, etc., were written all from a very different perspective. Okay, and it had a narrow vision of the inclusiveness of the society. That, of course, Dalits were just minding their own business. They were just obeying. They were people in obedience. They were people not confronting. Uh, and when they confronted, it was always a rebellion, but not a social rebellion, a thought out rebellion, but a kind of a violent movement. So there is a need, whereas the Bhagat Singh nationalism would be a very well planned, nationalism, would be a patriotic, but if the Dalit public is rebelling, then it is a mindless outburst which could not be understood. Okay, so this kind of a cognitive blackout, which has been pointed out by Vivek Kumar, the sociologist at JNU, uh, it is an interesting perspective. He is somebody who's evolved a lot of thinking on different ways of how violence can, how caste comes into this, and he has been talking about even abusing women, you know, with even abusing women by of abuse towards women by men, whether they were their own men or the upper caste men. uh, the lower caste women would always be at the receiving end. So she would be constant. Her intersectionality, her sphere would grow. She was a woman and a Dalit woman, and if she was from a rural part of India, then she would also be uneducated and very highly vulnerable. But in that, I want to point out to this woman, uh, what has not happened so far is that we have not understood the anger that is generated by such outbursts by the lower caste, rebellion, anger. That anger needs to be understood. We do not dismiss them as victims. They do react, and one of the best examples of a feminist reaction is Pulan Devi. And uh, she was from, you know, not such a low caste, but she would fall into the lower caste trunk of the Mallas, which is the boatmen. And in her childhood, since her childhood, she is raped by first of all by her husband. Now that is another level of contest as to will the husband rape. He was raped because she was a child when she was married. She was only 11 years old, and she was married off. In the rural areas, there would be some ceremony, but they would not be married off. But she was, and the husband had come to take her. So the husband took her and forcibly raped her. Uh, in this particular circumstance, she becomes a very angry person. Her body becomes very repulsive to these physical advances. And of course, you know, the, the fact that she was paraded naked in order to be insulted. And thereafter, slowly after one victimization after another, she decides to take up arms. Okay, you know her story. Uh, and of course, she's charged, put in jail for 11 years for killing 22 men and uh, stabs her earlier husband. And this is the kind of anger that she unleashes. Uh, and also, she shoots the men who are also Thakur men who rape her, and so on. Now, what is the message? She turns constitutional later on from being a dacoit outlaw to a constitutional person to being a parliamentarian. She returns to other forms of addressing people's problems. Okay. Now, you see, intersectionality is again very important here as to how scholarship, how feminism has to understand this kind of intersectionality. You know, basically, she has been dismissed by many people, and you know, in the case of Pulan Devi, when Shekhar Kapoor was making, you know, Bandit Queen. I'm sure you people must have heard of Bandit Queen. You know that movie. When Shekhar Kapoor made that, there was some agreement between them. She agreed to the movie, but she didn't know there were nude scenes in that, and she sat there when she saw those nude scenes during the premiere. She was shocked. She was shocked to see her representation, you know, and that is the moment she suddenly realized, oh well, I'm so vulnerable. I'm really vulnerable to my own representation because there was no rule that was followed even by Shekhar Kapoor. He thought, let me show the best. Let me show the best form of exploitation. Let me show the worst, it might have invoked sympathy, and the extent of victimhood could only be realized when we showed her nude. But the problem was that he didn't care about the feelings that she would have had. Okay, so that she filed a case against him, that this was not, he didn't take my permission to do this, and that you should listen to the interview. I have pointed out to the interview here, YouTube. There's an interview of Pulan Devi, and she talks about this particular movie. And she says, I'm a human being, I'm alive. I cannot watch this. This is, I'm not dead, I'm still alive. This man is making a movie on me, and he's representing me. And this was actually one of the best examples one can give of intersectionality. That how even the directors, producers, people who are in the commercial cinematic world, who are people not only in the cinematic worlds but also people who know how West will receive it. It was made for a Western audience with this body in mind. It has to be shown, But ultimately, he didn't consult her when she was. So, given all those points, I think I'll end my talk by saying, I didn't want to add too much into it. Um, labor has been at the center of political labor. Another important factor is labor, women in the factories, and a lot of work has been done on that. I just didn't want to take up that because can't be encapsulated into this. I just wanted to focus on caste because I think, this whole palette of things then don't get mixed up with the labor women. Now, a woman could be a labor woman, could be a Dalit woman, could be a all in one, that kind of intersectionality. So one has to know the training that we give in social science, we get and give in social science, is that these are the points which you need to note. So when you ask somebody, oh, are you studying that woman? Are you studying that personality? Are you studying Pulan Devi? Can you study Pulan Devi minus her caste? No. She's not only a woman. Why? Because it is so much in your face. She puts everything on your face. Like, yes, this is my identity. This is what I am. So, uh, in conclusion, what I would say is that this is a tool. This is a tool in the hands of younger scholars. That intersectionality. I'm glad you've chosen this topic actually, and there's so much that can be said about this. It's not just caste. You could use it for disability, which is again a very very flourishing field of research, extremely flourishing. Then you could also use it to understand women, like housemaids, as different from women in the factory, whose issues are much more channelized. What happens to your maid? Well, you pay her, you negotiate and pay her. But in a factory, that doesn't happen. In a factory, it is the union, and then it is, work hours, and some rules, regulation. When a woman comes to work in your house, you don't do that, do you? You'll say, okay, where do you live? How far do you come from? Do you use a bus? What do you use? I'll pay you accordingly. Okay, so these are functional. These are functional items or ideas that humanities students need to keep in mind. And finish my lecture with that. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you so much, ma'am, for your enlightening words. Okay, the way you describe and encapsulated the latent values that are there in just a mere word, which you said we cannot keep it limited terminology, because it has so much to know, and even we as a youth has to know our past, and apart from those latent values that need to be known, is only possible by the by people like you who have tried so much. And thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much for your time. Now I request our attendees to come forward and put their questions in the chat box so that we can ask ma'am.
Shubham, there are some questions in the chats, so you just can read those questions to me.
Are there any questions?
Okay, ma'am. Question have came, and it's by
Okay, I see. Yeah.
Bulbul, that why we never come to know a female. Basically, she want to say Chief Justice. Later, she corrected herself. So, why we have never seen a female justice in the history of India?
Bulbul, it's an excellent question. Why we haven't seen that? While we have women going up in the space, and mathematicians like Shakuntala and others, so we have all those things, but we don't have women judge. Yes, that is a absolutely. While in America you do have black women as judges, you know, and America is a very different place. It works with a different principle. Uh, I think in that sense uh, we need to see how many lawyers are there, how many advocates are there, how many magistrates are there. Rather than asking why they're not there, I think the reason is because they aren't enough at that level. And why they're not there is again that same question, because it goes, the question of intersectionality comes in. That, when we say women, they are, you're only looking at the educated one who might be eligible to come at this post, you know now I cannot say, oh, Dalit woman is not a judge, while you're absolutely right, not even a female judge. How can you have a you know well, while there are female judges, are you talking about the Chief Justice? I think you corrected yourself and said, I'm addressing the question of Chief Justice. Yeah, I'm doing the Chief Justice. Yeah. So, yes, you're very right. It needs to happen, yes, but only after enough judges are there, I guess. I haven't made a count really, but I know there are quite a few in India. I mean, there is, and of course, as is the case in vice chancellor, university vice chancellors are not there. Women, very few. Jamia got its first. We don't have any in JNU, never in our history. So it is a very disappointing or very thing that the glass ceiling has not been broken. While in sciences, the glass ceiling has been easy to break, right? While because it is here that you appoint people, right? In the sciences, people become scientists through their own, you know. But no, but for a female judge, uh, or a female chief justice, you have to first of all have to have a lobby, have to have acceptability, etc. But if you're a scientist, I don't know if you're convinced with my answer, but that's what I feel. Because since the Nehruvian period, we had at least 10 scientists, women scientists. So in the 50s and 60s, in fact, some of them were really engineers, and some of them designed 20 bridges and important bridges in the country and so on. Now, while we can say yes, it comes from the age, it comes from the education, the background, for 1950s, I would hardly imagine a Dalit woman would ever even think of becoming a scientist. So again, but yes, there is a dearth of female judge, and I agree with that. Yes. Any other question?
Guys, if you want, you can unmute yourself and ask it, even by audio over. Do come forward.
They can ask also. Shubham, if they're reluctant to write it, it's okay. They can ask also. Let it be a,
Yeah, yes,
interactive.
ma'am.
Yeah.
Sure, ma'am. Okay, I think it seems like
That's
people that
absolutely understandable in these times. Yes, I think they've listened to the lecture. Now they can think about things. Yeah.
yes, ma'am. And there is lot more to ponder upon after your session, I think. So now I request Susil to take over. Over to you, Susil.
Thank you, Shubham. It's was really a great session. And now I would like to uh, call our president, Mr. Jayan Singh Raghav, to vote of thanks. Over to you, Jayan.
So it's a great honor for ma'am us to have you there on the board. It was a very insightful and very informative lecture that you gave us today. So the question that you have seen, it's not coming because the people have now have came to know something about the things that the topic that you have covered in your talk. So now the people will start thinking, and it would be good if they would be like coming back to us to like ask the question.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Absolutely.
So it's a very great honor and a pleasure for us to have you there on so much in this tough times. Also, you just took out a very good time and just delivered us. So, like, what should I say? I don't have words to like thank you, ma'am. It was really
I would
great,
like to
amazing.
also thank you, Jayant, and your friends Sushil and Shubham, and I can see so many others. Really grateful that you gave me an opportunity, because I'm always, these days even our students are in a very, they're not feeling well mentally also, because people in their families are not well and all. But anyway, sometimes, you are also. I appreciate you people also, that you're able to conduct the talks and, feel a little normal. Although, we will still, we'll have to really pray for everybody who's, battling for life. And, it's an unprecedented time. And, but still we will look forward to a better tomorrow. We will look forward to a better times when, we can actually meet in person. We can meet the students. As a teacher, I can understand what a teacher would always like to look students in the eye, and as to understand how much they're, you know to take their questions in the class. I've never taught online before 1 year. Only since 1 year I've started teaching online. It's a completely reversed experience. So, well, let's pray. And very grateful to you and also Dr. Prateek, who initially got us in contact. So I just, thank you very much, Jen.
Thanks, ma'am. Thank you so much, ma'am. Thanks everyone for coming, all the attendees as well.
May I leave?
Yeah, you can leave, ma'am, and the attendees can also leave if they have filled the form, so they can fill the form and leave.
I have one question. Wait, there's somebody who's asking a question.
Yeah, it's from Vishal actually, ma'am. There is a question that according to Hindu Granth, household works only for the woman, and also Muslim Granth, woman lives in Nakab. Okay, Vishal, you can come online and you can unmute yourself.
Can you unmute yourself and then ask the question?
Yeah, and then ask. It's an incomplete question. Do come forward.
Yes, ma'am. I'm Vishal.
Hi, Vishal.
Yeah, I have one query that most of the people are working or are thinking about his religion's philosophy, uh, their religion philosophy. So he thinks about that according to his religion grantha, that women are not working for some work. So that is create the problem to the woman.
Vishal, first of all, let me tell you, there are two different things when you say women in the household and only in the household. While there is a desirability of women following all the traditions and being very chaste and dutiful towards the family and husband, that is true of all religions, not only Hinduism. Okay, this is a general thing. Be it Islam, be it Christianity, all older religions would like, this is the injunction for women that has been put. This has been done primarily to keep the family system alive, because that they think through the body of a woman that could be best upheld. However, that is only part of the story. It also, the reality is that women in the household will work. They will absolutely work. They will also be doing outside work. They will also be, there is no there isn't any Lakshman Rekha that has been drawn. You know, when we say Lakshman Rekha, you think there is that religion has drawn some Lakshman Rekha. The Lakshman Rekha is there, but it's a moral Lakshman Rekha. You see, it's not really household work. घर में काम करना है. She can go out to the market and buy the physical mobility. She can go and work in the neighborhood. In India, tell me how many women are, yeah, textually it is there, but it differs from country to country. Which country or which civilization, which, you know, depends on what period you're referring to, geographical boundary or cultural, you know, boundaries, what you're referring to depends on that. So it is not as though women have been asked only household work. In the Hindu texts, in the Shastras and Dharma Shastras, because society has been addressed according to the caste distinctions they have, because caste distinctions they think are given and real. So the women's work is also divided according to that. Okay, we can discuss that some other time, how they're divided according to the caste, because it will take me to another 20 minutes. I don't want to waste that much time. But at this point, addressing your question, I think do not read one text, only one thing in one text. And there are several other things which are given. So Lakshman Rekha is a notion that this woman will not cross Maryada. Okay, so that Maryada itself, it's a very constructive notion. Okay, you can interpret it yourself. That, you know, if a woman goes out, she meets somebody else, and so on. Now, there is a problem, you know, real problem in construing all this. I think you would, you know, understand that. Don't want to take much more time beyond this. Vishal, is that clear?
Yes, ma'am.
She's free to work because you need women to work in the house. काम से थोड़ा ही problem है उनको. They will go and they can work. Lakshman Rekha is not physical, mental. Okay, that is the thing. That women will not. That woman will remain truthful, chaste. You know what chaste is? Chaste to the husband. That's the Lakshman Rekha drawn, and that has been drawn in many other religions as well. So, okay.
Okay, now it seems like, ma'am, I think the queries are over, and it was nice listening
Good
to you,
question.
ma'am.
Yeah, thank you. Okay then. Yeah, thank you very much for having me, Shubham and Jen. Thank you.
You had some confusion. You were asking something.
Yeah.
The question you were asking something.
Who's this?
Ma'am, I'm asking.
Sorry, I didn't hear you.
You had some confusion, ma'am. So you were asking something, no?
No. It's done. It's done. Sorry.
Okay. Thanks, ma'am. Thanks.
Bye then. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am.
Have a blessed day, ma'am. Take care.